Doctor, about 11 months ago, we first sat down to have a discussion about a virus that everybody was just hearing about. What you had to say in February of 2020 frankly shocked me, and then over the next few months, all of it came true. Things are still looking kind of grim, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Especially in some countries like India and Pakistan and some parts of Africa, where it's very clear that we have not seen the worst of COVID-19 yet.
The only bright spot seems to be that there are vaccines sometimes available, correct?
Yes.
And I think you put a big vote of confidence towards that vaccine because you got vaccinated yourself. You're going to get a second shot soon, right?
Yes. Next week I take the second shot, and the last week I took the first one.
Okay. So in the past, we had discussions about how previous COVID vaccines were not terribly effective. This one seems to be very effective.
It's very interesting. You said previous COVID because all flu viruses belong to the bigger family, and they are called COVID coronaviruses, mainly because their surface has spikes on it, and their seed is in the center, and the seed is where the virus multiplies.
And the spikes get caught in your lungs and your mucous membrane. That's what makes it so infectious, correct?
That's right.
Now, there's 2 vaccines available. We're told that there's a third vaccine. Within a few weeks, it should be available. But right now, there's a big problem with supply and demand.
Well, first of all, United States has a population of 330 million. So if the thinking is that vaccination is our primary defense or our primary tool, simply stated, you could say that we as a nation, with a lot of resources and proven excellence in developing new technologies, the choice was, do we focus on the virus or do we focus on our natural flu fighters? And at that time, the powers to be, political or administrative or regulatory, they made a decision that we need to focus 100% on the virus and none on our own flu fighters under our own skins. I think that was a disastrous mistake for the nation.
And that's another reason that we're stuck with this one option.
That is so true.
Yeah.
That is so true. Okay. One time when we did that program with you, which you referred, one thing that I did not say because I was determined not to bring that subject up. Because I thought if I did make that mistake, looking back, that's what I thought then, that I would be subject to not only harsh criticism from some clinicians, but indeed some regulatory, reprimand or regulatory actions.
What specifically did you not bring up? So what did you avoid saying in that first interview?
At that time, we had 19 of our patients that I was directly responsible for the care, and 19 times the tests were positive, and some had the CRP, the viral test, and some was the serum test, blood test, which was the antibody produced in the body to defend the body against the virus. Okay. The reason I did not want to take that chance was because some very powerful politicians, some very powerful regulators, and some very, very powerful people on the administrative side were not willing to accept that the body could fight this virus as human body has been fighting other members of coronavirus family. It's a large family of flu viruses. I might say at this time that because none of them eventually were hospitalized, even though I told them this is a new virus, it's a dangerous virus. At that time, most people had seen some of the scenes from the movie from Italy. So people knew what this virus was capable of doing it. So at that time, I spent a lot of time with my own patients saying that we could try a combination of empirically useful or empirically proven therapies against this virus, as we have done with other coronaviruses. This is worth repeating, that all flu epidemics, seasonal epidemics in the past, were in reality coronaviruses. And I think coronavirus is here to stay. And we are, in fact, the title of the book, my second book on flu, is going to be Conquering Corona Cousins. Because I believe that the genetic mixing of this coronavirus, COVID-19, with the flu seasonal flu virus genetic, that has occurred over international scale. That's a global phenomenon. So from now on, you will not see flu viruses where on genetic testing, they don't have any genes from the coronavirus. So this is, to me, predictable. Okay. So at that time, it would have been, personally, I thought, dangerous for me to take a position, because politically and regulatory wise, there was no taste or there was no currency for this. It would only put me to extreme criticism, including regulatory action against me. Now I'm bringing that case up with you this time, almost a year later.
Right.
What has changed for me? Why do I feel free to bring this subject up, which I avoided so studiously last year? Because now they would have criticized me last year by saying, it's only your patients and you're talking about your own patients, and you know, this is a stretch of an imagination that our entire medical society in the United States is talking about such for vaccines and such for pharmaceuticals. And they were even using those malaria preventive drugs for this year. And they were using steroids, dexamethasone. And you come up with this thing, and how can we believe you? This time I have an answer. I would say I would show you the published facts of one country, where that country as a country decided that they wanted to focus more on human flu fighters under their skin than on vaccine or pharmaceutical. And that country was Uruguay. And the reports of that have been published in the two of the most prestigious journals. One is British Medical Journal, and one is Nature.
So let's talk about what Uruguay did right. Let's acknowledge what this country did wrong. I mean, initially, the CDC said, no, don't bother with these masks. And the real reason was there weren't enough masks to go around. Doctors did not have enough masks in hospitals. Okay? Then a test wasn't available. It was expensive. So testing wasn't pushed. And as I said, we're at this point now where, you know, thousands of people die every day. So it's clear that the United States took a lot of wrong turns in treating this worldwide pandemic and dealing with this. What did Uruguay, what did they do right? What did they do different?
We can say that people of Uruguay, perhaps by coincidence, chose the right direction. There were some young people who were well trained in France, Pasteur Institute, about virologic methods.
Right.
There was no regulatory agency which told them that you can't do this and you know, okay. And the regulatory agencies they had established certain standards, and without following those standards, the product which you would put out would be illegal in the United States.
Right.
But these young people from Uruguay, they were about, I think they were 8 or 9 people. They went and they used the knowledge that they got from France, and they developed a homemade test for COVID-19. And then, since they didn't need a regulatory approval, they went in and used that test. And so they found out, to their great surprise, that they had hit a gold mine. Mm-hmm. Because the test was very, very good. It correlated extremely well with their clinical evaluation. Right. Then they did something truly, truly extraordinary. And I don't know it was pure serendipity or this was an amazing display of forethought. Right. They took their indigenous approach. So rather than go to FDA and seek an approval of pharmaceutical, which was such a big controversial issue in the United States, and they did not have the resources or the wherewithal to produce vaccine. So vaccine was out, pharmaceuticals were out, so they did this, they said, let's go to our senior citizens, let's go to our ancestors, let's try to find out how did they cope with this, okay?
These are old remedies.
These are old indigenous remedies. They were herbs, they were spices, they were, one thing at that time I did not know, now I know, that in both China and India, the two oldest cultures, two of the most populous nations in the world, they had this tradition of using simply temperature as a defense against the flu virus. Mm-hmm. Now, it seems very odd, but when you think about it, when was the last time you saw a seasonal flu epidemic in August? When was the last time you saw it in July? How is it that, seasonal flu always comes in winter?
Always in winter, yeah.
It is because the flu virus has an external envelope made up of fats. Mm. So in cold weather, the fat firms up and it protects the seed, inner seed, which is a protein, right, by which the virus replicates, okay? So once you make the external envelope, which is made of fat, broken even at a microscopic level, such is the communication between these molecules, that the seed stops multiplying. Mm-hmm. And that breaks the multiplication and duplication and further spread of the virus, okay? So there is a tradition in India, which at that time I didn't know last time when we met. And that tradition is also in China, and that China is very, very simple. And maybe I should just, in 2-3 sentences, I do that.
Please,
because when I heard about that, I became so curious that I realized that I need to do this test myself and find out what is the truth about that. Because if it is helpful, then it is a crime against humankind that we don't talk about it, we don't disseminate this information, and you never hear it from the medical consultants of Trump, or you don't see it from the other directions, or okay, that is never a mention of anything. What I heard from a Chinese was originally, that I will tell you the first. Then what I will tell you what one of my colleagues from India told me about that, and that encouraged me that I should do the test myself. Now here is what the test goes. The evening before, or just before bed, I take Metamucil, which is called psyllium, okay. So what I do is I take 1 or 2 teaspoons of psyllium in a paper cup. I will put cold water, I'll stir it quickly, and I'll just drink it up. Now that is at bedtime. In the morning, I will take 10 ounces. As I said, I'm doing this, and I think this is my 8th day that I'm doing it. Okay? So I would take 10 ounces of water and I would heat it as if I'm heating water for making tea. So then it is really very, very hot. And you can only sip it at that temperature. Then I would take another 10 ounces of cold water and then I blend it. And my purpose in blending is to bring the temperature drinkable, okay, so that I don't have to sip it and spend 2 hours finishing 10 ounces of hot water. So I can finish it in a minute and a half. But the temperature still is, I can't tell you what is the temperature because I should have taken the temperature, but I didn't.
But it's hotter than warm.
Warm, clearly hotter than warm. Okay, and then if I think that I can heat it up a little, I will take extra hot water, put a little bit more, and raise the temperature. First of all, I have become very respectable of indigenous traditions, healing traditions of both India and China. Okay. At that time, I didn't know, but there was a professor here who came to see me as a patient. He's from Morocco. And when I was talking to him about this, he smiled and he said, we also do that in Morocco. So I said, thank you. You're the first person that you can say, this is also an African tradition. That encourages me to spread that. It occurred to me that all bioenergetic reactions in the human body are temperature sensitive. All of them. I don't know an exception to anything. If we were going to artificially raise the temperature of the inner lining of the entire gastrointestinal tract, that's where the virus goes. It goes to the lungs, but then a lot of it is swallowed up and there are secretions and they find their way into this here. So I thought that this makes sense to me, because this is a virus which thrives on cold weather. We are deliberately now changing the temperature. And so that temperature in the intestinal tract, gastrointestinal tract, may not be as tolerant to the virus. I also knew that I am going by tradition. At that time, I knew about the Chinese, and one of our doctors is from India. And then she told me this is what my grandmother and grandfather did do that. And then the third thing happened this evening, about Morocco and Africa. So I started doing that. And now I'm interested in, of course, I am feeling it myself each, day. But I am also asking some of my colleagues to do that before I started doing it on my patients. Interestingly, the patients after 3 or 4 days, when I had asked them, how did it go? They would smile and they would say, very well. I said, okay. So tell me, you are smiling. So was it a positive experience? Every one of them said it was positive experience. I said, in what way? He said, one of the patients I remember said, I felt so light. Okay. So that's very desirable if in the morning you feel light. I said, do you mean that you look forward to the day a little bit better than the day before? He said, yes, something like that. And one person said, my energy was really better. Sometimes in the morning I am sluggish. And this thing. And one person said, oh, this is cleansing and flushing out the garbage, which I had never experienced before. I said, did you have chronic constipation? She said, no, that was not my problem, but this just gave you the sense. And this was what I personally was experiencing. Something positive is happening. And then I tried to think, since I have interest in neurosciences, and I've done a lot of work with autism and people with dementia. It always interested me that evolution would have spent, looking backwards and recapping these things, something like 500 to 600 million years to perfect the nervous system, central nervous system. And evolution may have used a little bit less time in perfecting the gastrointestinal system. So I'm given to what theoretical physicists do. They just imagine and they write it up and they figure that other people would like to prove them wrong. And when they cannot, then their theory becomes hypothesis, becomes a theory, and then other people will in trying to prove them wrong, they have to do some experiments. Okay, so in this case, I thought that the connections between the central nervous system and the gastrointestinal tract have to be far more complex and intricately interdependent. Then what we have an idea that there is a sphincter at the end of the esophagus, and there is a sphincter at the end of the stomach, and there is a sphincter, between the ileum and the colon, etc. We have very superficial ideas of the language of the gastrointestinal tract, and the idea that the central nervous system is going to be actively integrating moment by moment with the gastrointestinal, that I knew would invite laughter. Okay, but this was in my mind, that when we have the technology to look into this, we will follow the communication in these two big centers. Richard, for me, these things happened over a period of decades. Okay, this fact that the intercommunication, I'll put it in simple ways. If you ask most doctors what are the two most important organs of the body, most likely the answer is going to be the heart, number one, and the brain, number two. If you ask me this question, what are the two most important organs, I would say liver and kidneys. Okay, and I have written extensively on both subjects. So somebody would say, well, what is the basis of your statement? I would say, go to the books of pathology and study very carefully. Because what shows up in the heart and what shows up in the brain as a matter of disease or dysfunction, the seeds of that are sown in the gut, or they are sown in the kidneys or in the liver. Okay, so I believe that if anybody is serious about prevention of the disease, or they really are serious about studying health as opposed to studying disease, they have to be preoccupied with the liver and the kidneys. Okay. So now the issue shifts from the ideas of diseases to the importance of communication, let's say between the liver and the kidneys. Most people probably don't know, or they have not heard it, but there is a thing called hepatorenal syndrome, where the problem of the kidneys create problems with the liver, or the problems start in the liver and they involve the kidneys, and they are well documented. This is part of the established knowledge. Okay, so now what I am suggesting is, if anybody wants to do it, I have not seen any negative thing. Neither have Chinese reported negative things about drinking hot water, nor have Indians reported. And today I found out, nor have the Arabs done it. And the Arab tradition comes from France.
From France. So just the simple act of drinking hot water, hot fluids, can increase your body's ability to resist this nasty virus and other nasty viruses.
Because it will not proliferate with as much impunity in the warmer internal conditions of the human body, as it does on the outside temperature in winter.
Just warming up the gastrointestinal tract.
Just like that. And I think that people are going to find out, as this thing is better known, that there are other advantages on the mood. Because you can't talk about nervous system without talking about mentation, about mood, about intellect, about curiosity. And so this is basically our existence. This is our reality. Okay. Right. So I think that's positive. But in addition, there is something important that I learned, which I think we talked about in the first program. There's a community of people of Pakistan who settled in northern New Jersey and Boonton is the name of the town, northern New Jersey. And so these people are still living in a very close, clannish, tribal ways.
And they're living the
old things, okay.
Old, yeah.
Right. So 2 of their young men got hit by COVID-19 in the earlier days, and both of them died within 24 hours. Wow. And so this was a tribal tragedy. And at that time, you remember in the early years, there were severe limitations to how many people can get together for a funeral. Yes. Or how many people can go and witness.
There's still limitations now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that was extraordinarily traumatic for this community. That now when our 2 young people died, we can't even get close to the grave.
And that's been part of the stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that makes this virus so horrible. So many people have.
So now somebody came up with this idea that let's get our grandmas and our aunts together and our moms together, and let's see what do they remember about doing about these flus in Pakistan before they came here. Mm-hmm. So they made a list of those things, okay. And Ginger came way up on the top of that. Mm-hmm. So when I heard about that, one member of our staff is actually from that community. So through that, I met with some of their, older women. And one of the things that they said with enthusiasm is ginger chicken broth. Mm-hmm. So that's called yakhni in Pakistani language. But we said, okay, let's call it chicken bone broth. Okay. So then I was curious as to, is there a way that we can translate this into our language of today's America? So I said to one woman, I said, is there something which stands out in your mind that when you do that with something particular, one of these natural things, remedies, soups and herbs and spices and, that stands out in your mind? She said, yes. Sometimes these viruses and the flu exhaust you. And after 1 week and 2 weeks, you are still bone tired. So I said, yes, I've seen that. So what happens when you give them what? She said, it is the chicken bone yakhni, translation broth. I said, what happens when you do that? She said, for that problem where there is persistent, debilitating chronic fatigue, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks after a virus infection, that is where this remedy is extremely valuable. I said, in what way? She said, these people perk up. After 2 or 3 days, rather than have 3 weeks of illness, in 2 or 3 days, they get better. Now, Richard.
Do you know a medical reason for that?
Yes.
Okay, please.
That's how I was interested in it.
Okay.
When a woman has a very heavy menstrual flow, she loses a lot of blood. If a man is involved in an automobile or bicycle accident, motorcycle accident, they may sometimes lose a lot of blood, automobile accidents. Now, nature obviously would have anticipated, because there were previous earthquakes and things happened deep in the past. So nature would have thought about coming up with a mechanism of supplying an emergency blood transfusion, so to speak. Because the bone marrow cannot produce, if you lose, let's say, 2 units of blood, 2 liters of blood, the bone marrow does not have a capacity to, in 24 hours or 36 hours, produce as much blood. So what would have nature done? Nature would have built a reserve. Nature is master of building reserves. So in reality, what I was taught in first year medical school back in 1958 is that indeed there is a reserve of these cells which are ready to be released into the circulation, but they are kept as a reserve in certain segments of bone marrow. When the signal comes, and the signal is oxygen signal, Oxygen communicates information both by its absence and by its presence. So in this case, the drop in the blood means drop in the, well, let's start with the blood flow. You have lost blood, so there is less volume of blood. There is less blood available to circulate. And so there is going to be a fall also in the partial pressure of oxygen going to the bone marrow. Well, the bone marrow cells sense this, and there's a protein, and the lack of oxygen brings a conformational change in the protein. Actually, there is a family of protein. They are called HIFs, if somebody wants to look it up, hypoxia-inducible factor. And that reserve is released. And that reserve brings you the blood and the oxygen. And that's the answer for the problem of fatigue. Okay? Wow. So, but they have other, teas and recipes, and the two big players were turmeric and ginger. And so that I adopted from them. So I routinely recommend that people take half a teaspoon of turmeric powder, okay? And I recommend 500 milligrams of vitamin C 3 times a day or 4 times a day. But I would do that in all respiratory viruses, okay? And the other thing which we know from experience is that dehydration means build up of acidity. The two conditions that COVID-19 senses, and that is the survival advantage that evolution gave to COVID-19. It can sense when the tissues and the organ in the body are low in oxygen, and the drop in oxygen automatically builds up acids. But the acidity buildup occurs from a lot of other things: environmental pollution, stress, anger, betrayal, that sort of thing, and bad food. Okay, so then these are the two conditions: lack of oxygen and buildup of acidity. Next time your viewers are listening to somebody on television or radio, a doctor talking about COVID, he would go out of the way to emphasize that COVID-19 takes lives of those people who have pre-existing comorbidities. Every time I heard that and I paid attention to it, diabetes was number one. Every time, asthma was number two. Then came chronic inflammatory diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, then came cancers. But what is common in all these conditions that I just named? Oxygen is low and acidity is up. So apparently for COVID-19 and the other viruses in the corona family of the viruses, they have affinity for those tissues and cells which have this duality of low on oxygen and high on acidity. So now we are finding out, we are coming closer to what might be the theoretical advantage of focusing on our natural flu fighters as opposed to limiting all our energy, time, and resources to looking for drugs or looking for vaccines. Especially for flu, because flu vaccine has not had a very good stellar record. CDC said, as an average in the last 30 years, every year seasonal flu claimed 27,000 American lives. That comes to 81,000 every 3 years. So the average loss of life in America every 3 years has been 81,000. Now I want to ask my colleagues, how much time did you devote to this subject, that when we are interested in fighting flu, corona flu, novel viruses, our own cells and tissues are agnostic to it. They are not primed for it, okay? So now, in that context, how can we afford to ignore our own flu fighters and put all our eggs in the basket of vaccines, knowing full well that we lost 81,000 lives as an average every 3 years. Okay?
Yeah.
But that also tells us that the experience of other people, I mentioned one community in this, but the example of Uruguay is an amazing example. And I mentioned earlier, it has been published in British Medical Journal, and it has also been published in the journal Nature. What they did was, they maximized not lockouts, school lockouts, business lockouts, closing up the country, but their mind went on to learning from their ancestors, from their families, from their tribes, what would they do? And so they concentrated on that. But the young people who were trained in France, they came in homemade, they came up with a fast corona test to detect the presence, okay? So they were early. They are talking about the months of, here it was January 2020, and now they are talking about March. By March and early April, they had perfected the test, and they have, to their satisfaction, said, this test is reliable. And from that, they went on to their ancestral approach. Now, I can't tell you specific information, whether they recognized turmeric or ginger, or they recommended some, Chinese are very familiar with the Indian herbology. Ashwagandha, for example. A lot of these herbs that come from Indian tradition, they actually are the same as they come from the Chinese tradition. Only the names are different. So when I was talking about our patients who none of them had to be hospitalized, okay, by their other doctors, okay, because I don't go to hospital anymore. So I can't tell you specifically, because that has not been published, that Uruguay people, what herbs did they prefer, or what laxatives they did, or they don't talk about the hot water that I mentioned from the Chinese tradition, Indian tradition, and now from the Arab tradition. But dehydration is bad, and the easiest way to reduce acidity is overhydrate. Now this tea test, the water, okay? And so you are adding more water. 20 ounces of water is a lot of water in the morning, okay? To have to go to the bathroom for a few times, that's a small price to pay for all the advantages of overhydration. Plus you are giving you the advantage of warmer, higher temperature, internal environments, which will suppress the viruses, and they will bring to life our own flu fighters.
I've heard also that steam can be very beneficial.
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, steam is going to more or less do the same thing as the hot water, except hot water is far more convenient to do than producing steam. But I think I would suspect that when the two methods are compared closely, objectively, you will find the benefits very comparable. I mentioned earlier that the pneumonia of COVID is altogether different from ordinary pneumonia by bacteria. Similarly, a cardiologist was telling me that myositis of corona is altogether different disease than myositis from other, bacteria or other viruses, etc.
It's turning out, excuse me for interrupting, but it's turning out that corona is pretty unique, and almost a year into this pandemic, there's a lot that's not understood.
Richard, yes and no, okay? The Uruguay example would be open to a lot of questions unless you compare Uruguay with Argentina. Okay, so that and their neighbors, the countries in Latin America, which are neighbors, direct neighbors of Uruguay, they have very high levels of the infections and mortality. And so Uruguay, clearly it stands out, and they have, Moratorio, I think is the name of the first author from Uruguay. He's become a national hero. They buy beer for him. If he goes to swimming, there are all kinds of people surrounding him. So, but what he did was extraordinary, is extraordinary. So he has become a national, rightfully, he has become a national hero. But my view would be that why should some of the American doctors make similar progress in the model of empowering our own flu fighters, okay? Because that's what they did too. Developing a test earlier on put them at an advantage with a lot of those neighboring countries. But the neighboring countries, none of those countries is as close to this. Uruguay never closed up. They never closed their schools, okay? Originally, earlier on, the frequency of infection Uruguay was also high. It was as high as the neighboring country. But then when it comes to fatalities, then it sort of dries up. So I think they can count in dozens the total number of lives that they lost in the whole country, Uruguay. And look at, I think 1 week ago, we in America started listening that 4,000 people or so, they lose every day. And I think New York Times, sometimes in, this is January, sometimes I think in later part of January 2021, their headline was that 100,000 lives were lost in America over a period of 5 weeks.
5 weeks, yes.
Which comes to 20,000, which comes to really 20,000 lives every week, which comes to basically close to what that 4,000 is.
Different parts of the country, rates are going up, rates are going down. In New York, it's down a little, but it still seems to be getting worse, doesn't it?
Let's talk about this issue of fear, and let's talk this issue of stress, especially fear, okay? Some of your viewers may not mind the distraction here for what I'm going to say next, okay? If somebody asked me, if Richard, you asked me, how many years have you studied medicine, healing? I'll say 62, to be precise. If you ask me the next question, in 62 years, from your publication, from your research, you have had interest in health as opposed to disease. So that makes it interesting what your answer might be. What would you consider stands out in your mind as the right focus for anyone who is interested in health for his entire life? I thought of it for my book. So I said, how would I talk to an American who doesn't know anything about me? He's not my patient. How would I communicate to him, answer this question? Because this question, answer to would be really very useful. So let me try to give you this answer very briefly. I thought that I would write that the best thing would be that something happens and I don't like it that happened. And then I see, oh God, I was responsible for it. How could I be so careless? I shouldn't have done it. Okay. And then I hear a voice from inside. You're okay. So I said, but I did this dumb thing, this is bad. Okay. But the voice is, you're okay. So another voice comes from me. Why am I okay if I did that? Then the first voice comes in, because God made you good. I said, so God made me good, and so I did that dumb thing. He said, yes, you did something and that you are embarrassed by that, but that's not all of it. You are good because God made you good. I said, okay, all right, I'm good. He said, do you think God had your back? How old are you? I said, well, 82 years. So, do you think that God had your back for 82 years? I said, oh yes. Oh yes, obviously. Why do you ask me? He said, if God's blessings had your back for 82 years, now do you think it's beyond God that He would have His back, your back, for the rest of your life? I said, well, you have a point. And I said, but I think my father played a big role. He used to pray for me a lot. Okay. So he said, God has His own way of doing things. Okay. I'm looking at the questions of this, and you have answered the question. And then I thought about that, and I repeated the words a few times. One thing that will do is get rid of your fears. Because these are very simple, innocent words. But the voice now, this time, is not coming from outside. Somebody is not trying to impress me. Somebody is not trying to sell me. Somebody is not trying to give me an elixir of life. Okay? Some images of my father who passed on 45 years ago or so, they come and I feel his presence on my shoulder. Whenever something good happens to me, and I know that this happened, I didn't deserve it, but he's there to support me. But putting in that sense, I am good because God made me good. And God had my back for 82 years. And so why it should be odd or difficult for me that He would have, His blessings would have my back for another few years. I want to emphasize that a lot of the damage done to this country was the fear, panic and fear. Okay? So all these things that we were going, the people of Uruguay, they were focusing on positive things, the things they could do. And their earlier people, their older people, their aunts and their grandmas and grandfathers, they vouched for this, because why would they lie to their younger people that, this ginger is better than turmeric, or, onion soup is better than this, etc. I think that Uruguay has given whole world a very important lesson. And the lesson is, let's call it science with heart. What Uruguay did was a bunch of young scientists, but they did science with a heart. And the heart was into trying to save lives and caring for their community. We Americans, unfortunately, excelled in science, but without heart. We did not understand the consequences, and this is amazing because of those people who have been following these seasonal epidemics. How is it that something that, they were young people, they were in their late teens and their 20s, these people from Uruguay, who saved Uruguay, and they got prizes, and now it is a shining example for all the countries, not only in Latin America, but countries in Africa, countries in Asia. Okay? So we still have the possibility that they could see the distinction between committing all your resources and energy on the virus and taking note of what virus is doing, but more importantly, putting our energy into what our own flu fighters are doing. I believe that if there was a shift of focus in this, that would be a far better strategy going forward. Now then they are coming up the second wave and the third wave, etc. That is sheer nonsense. And it is amazing that those people who are at that level of, authority, they cannot understand this, that genes have already mixed before they came from China. Seasonal flu is here every year. So this is why I'm saying that we can call it corona cousins. Because from now on, all our seasonal flus are going to be corona cousins. Mm-hmm. And now it makes it more important that we see the difference between focusing our own flu fighters or restricting everything to experts. Experts do not benefit from empowering of the corona fighters, of ordinary people. There's no money in it. Right. There's no fame in it. There's no profitability in it. So I think this has to be a change from people. It was the gift of our aunts and our grandmothers and our grandfathers and our moms, etc. And I think that The room for optimism in this story, to me, is those young people from Uruguay who had the courage to go back to their ancestors and find out. I'm not talking about late and early ancestors. I'm talking about their moms and their aunts. They're so beautiful. So these were the things they were doing in their homes anyway. And now, what is the future of a vaccine? I pray that it will work better than seasonal flu, because seasonal flu does not have, and Zika virus, Ebola virus, HIV virus, vaccines really have not worked very well. They have worked very well for polio. They have worked very well for smallpox. Measles is a good example. So this generic rejection of vaccines, which unfortunately has been undertaken by some people, okay, with their saying that vaccines do this. And I think the risk of autism vaccine was a particularly pernicious deviation, okay?
Yeah, it's totally not inaccurate.
Well, it was proven by those people in the early report, John Wakeman's report. Mm-hmm. The British Medical Association dug out all the charts, and that's why they took his license away. Okay, so, but I think in addition, some people who don't have a lot of experience treating children or a lot of experience with the results of, they just joined the bandwagon of denouncing vaccination. I think that's bad. Okay, so time will tell, and it will take us 5-10 years to truly find the value of vaccine. So far, my visit to Mount Sinai West Hospital, where I had my own vaccine, was wonderful because there were a lot of doctors there, the hospital staff doctors, and the nurses. So in that setting, and they do observe you for 15 minutes. So I had to, that was a compulsory observation, okay? But it allowed me to listen to nurses and listen to doctors, and there was no reason for them to deliberately misguide me. Right. And they didn't, okay? Because you can tell, you can tell when somebody is talking to you seriously or not. They basically said this thing: we have not fortunately encountered as yet any significant issue. As far as I'm concerned, this is like taking an allergy shot. It was just 1 or 2 seconds of the needle going in, and after that, absolutely I did not feel anything.
We've stumbled upon a couple of things that can serve as themes for subsequent shows. COVID cousins, talking about the effects of the vaccine. Can you give us some simple steps, some simple remedies that can strengthen our immune system, things that people have around the house or can get very easily?
You touched a very sensitive spot. Okay. Because
I gave you 60 seconds to finish, but go ahead.
For several months in my WBI radio and also in this MNN, I have felt that we should discard the word immunity and immune system. They do not enlighten you to what the problem is. So, for example, over years we have said that strengthen your immune system. The question is how.
I'm repeating the words that I hear on TV because I'm not a medical person. But what simple steps can we take besides hot water, besides ginger, besides turmeric? What simple things can we do every day that will protect us from this virus and others?
Working, walking, worship. When you go to a temple or when you go to, let's say, do a church, a 7-8 years old girl or her mom, they expect church to be a place of sacred activity where people honor each people. They are respectful. They are not yelling screams and screaming at people, etc. They are not calling each other names, okay? So there is some music and there may be some stained glass. All of that puts the people in there in a state which is the best state for getting oxygen. not only getting in more oxygen, because you're not hyperventilating, you're not angry, you are not doing this and you're not doing that, but you are also keeping the arteries open. You're not tightening the arteries. You're not tightening the muscles. Lot of the muscle and the acid accumulation in the body comes from tight muscles. Now, this tight muscles, this would be a simple thing. Rather than saying increase your immunity, just simple. Breathe out slowly. Give some more time for the oxygen in the air to get to your blood and get to your heart and get to your brain. Okay, so that's practical thing. Okay, the second thing is you say that, okay, we want to prevent buildup of the acid. Well, if you have more oxygen, oxygen burns the acid. All metabolic acids are actually packets of energy. Okay, and the oxygen system breaks down these acids to release energy for us to walk and for us to breathe and for our brain to function. Okay, so if you meet the first objective, you have partially met the second objective automatically. More oxygen means less acid. But then there are other things that, when ordinary awareness of difference between good food and bad food, okay, all natural oils are very good for oxygen and less acid.
And you start your morning with oil?
With oil, yes. And my favorite oils, I can throw that in, is almond oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, hazelnut oil. I do have pistachio oil also. I like the flavor of that. But extra virgin olive oil is good. Sesame oil is good. If you're going to do sesame oil, you try to deal with pale color sesame oil. If it is darker, usually it's because they heated it for taste.
And very quickly, because we're just about out of time, what do you do with the oil?
Straight up. In the morning, I take a tablespoon of one of the oils and I just swallow it. And then if my spirit moves, I take another spoon. Oils, 90% of the cell membranes of the brain cells and the central nervous system is all oil.
I didn't know that.
Most of the action in the human body is at the interface of cells. The cells are predominantly oils. And the oil therapy has a very old history about that, okay? So, in fact, I have thought about this on this issue because it interests me. In my life, I do not remember my grandmother or my mother or my aunts ever telling me that butter is bad for you, and eggs are bad for you, and olive oil is bad for you. I think this malignancy, this venom against the oil, it really is a legacy of this cholesterol malignancy. And the cholesterol is where they knew, the people of money have money because they understand money. They knew that if we focus on cholesterol and link it to stroke and heart attack, it's not going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's going to be multi-trillion industry. And those things came true, okay? So in 2015, the Journal of American Medical Association published an editorial. And the people should really get that and read that, okay? I give it to all my patients. And I ask them to please read it 2 or 3 times. There is no way you can read that editorial and then say, editorially, both government, the Department of Agriculture, and American Medical Association clearly, unequivocally are saying there is no truth to the bad effects of cholesterol in the diet or cholesterol in the serum or any relationship with clinical cardiovascular disease. Translation: everything that we have been taught about cholesterol has been not based on facts.
And I'm afraid we're all out of time. We look forward to our next show. Dr. Ali, thank you so much.
Oh, Richard, it's always nice to be with you.
Dr. Ali's books and videos are available through the website aliacademy.org. Additional courses, remedies, and recipes are also available at alidiabetes.org and aliscience.org. Proceeds from Dr. Ali's books and videos go to the educational and nutritional efforts of the Children's Health Corps.